Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange Podcast. Stories by leaders for leaders to help you raise the bar on your own excellence, to release the potential inside of you. Now, here's today's podcast. Greetings, everyone. This is Hugh Ballou. Welcome to the Nonprofit Exchange. In the last 7.5 years, we've had fascinating people. And today is certainly no exception. People who've been there, done important things, most of the time have had multiple experiences, sometimes multiple careers like yours truly. And we've learned from each one. And as we get older, we get to take all of that knowledge, that experience, and that wisdom and put it together. So our goal here is to help you learn sound business principles for running the business part of your nonprofit or your church, your synagogue, or your organization, your membership organization. And my guest today is a gentleman whom I've just met. But I looked at his one sheet, looked at his website, and I said, we need to have this man tell his story to nonprofit leaders on the nonprofit. So I'm going to throw it to Bill. Why do you do what you do?
Hugh, so thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me on the Nonprofit Exchange here today. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor since 1987. And the reason I do what I do is I love watching women and men who want to help people. They have an idea about helping people. They're not sure how to do it. And I'd love to watch them be successful. My whole ministry has been about pouring into people who want to do things, are action oriented. They want to make a difference either in their family or in their community or their business, wherever it may be. And I get to live vicariously through them. So, gosh, that's what I do. What I do. We help start ministries. We help start nonprofits, churches, for-profit businesses that are more kingdom oriented. Most of the things that we work with and have helped start are nonprofits. So my heart really goes out, especially to those who are cause driven. They want to make a difference, and they oftentimes want to do that in such a way that is sustainable. And that's one of our fortes. If you want to be around for a while and you want to be financially sustainable and you want your cause to change that community or that neighborhood, then we love to work with you and we get to live through you. We get to celebrate your success from behind the scenes.
Yay. So Bill Woolsey's been around. He's done some important things. And if you want to find this interview, there'll be a transcription on the interview page. Go to the Nonprofit Exchange, THE, nonprofitexchange.org, O-R-G. And that'll lead you to the summary page. And then you can find all of the episodes. And Bill's quotes and his sound bites will be there in the transcription.
That's always scary when you say that. You know, you're kind of like, oh my, I wonder what they're gonna pick out of this baby.
I had a fun. I work with groups and teach them how they can take what they already know. We have things we know. We haven't figured out how to utilize them in a different setting. So one of my fun jobs was to do leadership for the American Choral Directors. So I had 100 of my peers, 100 conductors in the room. And it was scary at the end. They were quoting me. I said, oh my. So I live to take what we know as conductors and transpose it into a non-musical setting, which if you know how to run a rehearsal, you know how to run a meeting. Just have to think of it differently and get out of the habit of the old. And so you've had let me just also say, when you go to the Nonprofit Exchange, .org and you find the interview page, the video will be there, the transcript, also a link to Bill's website. It's called FiveTwo.com. It's written out, F-I-V-E dot, no dot, excuse me, FiveTwo.com. That's where the dot goes. And you'll find out more about Bill and what he does. But we're here to, not to sell something, we're here to share some stories, some wisdom, have a good time, and hopefully you'll go away with one new idea that you can implement right away. So we're talking about nonprofit growth. Now, talk about the word nonprofit. In my world, that's just a really bad word. It's a lie. And so you talked about starting up businesses, starting up nonprofits, starting up churches, starting up associations, and I do the same thing. And it's all very, very similar, except it's a lot harder in a nonprofit or church. So talk about the business concepts, that the mindset that we need, first of all, for that success to gain sustainability.
Right. So the nonprofit world, especially, exists because of a cause. There's some cause that's driving this impetus forward. And when we work with teams and leaders and train them, our process we lovingly call Mother Teresa meets a friendly Mark Cuban. And so the Mother Teresa is this cause part, but the friendly Mark Cuban is the business acumen. We in our training we employ lean business startup principles. So we don't want you to spend a dollar prematurely. You can only spend a dollar once. We want you to spend it well. And therefore, we have you do testing and we have you make sure that you're really honed in on who it is that you're serving and what that person is trying to attain or what the pains are they're going through and how your particular cause, your value is going to benefit them. We actually, Hugh, we took the name FiveTwo from the miracle, the feeding of the 5,000. So in that account, when Jesus tells his followers come to him, his 12, they come to him and they say, "You need to send the crowd away. Everybody's hungry. They need to go get something to eat." And he commands them. He doesn't speak much in that miracle, but he commands them first of all, and he says, "You give them something to eat." So, in other words, he holds them accountable for the crowd, for the community, which nonprofit leaders, they get that. They understand that. They see a problem and they're trying to fix this problem. And then they say to him, "Well, it's going to take half a year's wages." And the backstory would be, we're never going to see these people again. We don't know them in the first place. They're all strangers. We don't live here. And you don't want us to spend half a year's wages. It'd be a waste of money. Jesus says, "Go and see how many loaves and fish you have." He commands them again. So both times he speaks, commands. He sends them into the crowd. They find the little boys 5 loaves and 2 fish. And you also want to kind of go, surely y'all couldn't find more food than that in a crowd this size. But that's what they bring back. And Jesus takes the meager 5 loaves and 2 fish, he multiplies it and feeds the crowd. When we work with nonprofit leaders, one of their biggest issues is, where's the money going to come from? Usually their second one, and they're tied together, is where the people, the volunteers, going to come from. And what we encourage you to do is, before you go there, that you really focus and define very clearly who you're serving, what you're doing to serve them, because it's the success in that serving that you can then share with donors, and that's how you're going to build your donor base. That's how your donors are going to feel like their ROI is coming back to them in what you're doing. So we teach that miracle, really a abundance and scarcity, that nonprofit leaders are always they're on this scarcity, kind of gopher wheel kind of thing, or hamster wheel. And what we want to do is when you tie in really tight on this customer that God is calling you to care for and to make their life better, or that cause better, you'll be surprised how the community will come forward and will help fund that cause.
And you've just expanded on what I noted, that nonprofit is a word that puts us into that scarcity mindset.
That's a great statement. And what's really kind of cool, if you were to go to read Mark 6, where our account of the miracle, we use that account, the whole chapter is a scarcity chapter. He sends his 12 out on a mission trip. They can't take anything. They can just take the shirt on their back and the shoes on their feet. And so they have to do the work with no resources except for his spirit, his presence. And it works. And then they come back and he does this miracle and they don't get the lesson. They go, "Well, how are we going to feed all these people?" And he's like, "I got this." And in nonprofits, you said earlier, it's a kind of a joke phrase, or the tag. I run into people all the time. "Well, you can't make a profit in a nonprofit." Well, you can't. You don't own the nonprofit. and you can't keep the profit. The profit needs to be reinvested, but you should be making a net profit, or else your nonprofit's not going to stay around long.
Yeah, we frame it as proceeds. That gets people less anxious, but you're right. If you don't make a profit, you can't pay salaries, you can't pay for program development, you can't impact people's lives. And you mentioned ROI. In the traditional equity funding, ROI is you get money back from your investment, return on investment. This is return on impact.
That's right.
And I like to use ROL, return on life, because you're giving people life they didn't have before.
That's
So let's unpack this scarcity. So the story that you talked about, I never thought about it commanding, except I thought about it him and saying do this, which I didn't use the word command, but you're right. It's not. Jesus was always very clear and very principle based. You know, sit in groups of 50, get the loaves and fishes, and he blessed them, and had 12 baskets left over from almost nothing. So it's in some sense, we with this scarcity thinking are our own worst enemies.
That is so very true. We use this miracle in our training as a fundamental starting point, because there are some core values that Jesus demonstrates in this miracle. And when you're going to start or lead an organization, doesn't matter what it is, if you're the leader or the founder, especially, your values, the organization is going to take on your values. It's going to look like you. Matter of fact, if you find yourself in a new position and you can't get the values to marry up well, at some point you're going to leave, or else they're going to kick you out because y'all just don't fit. So values are critical. And we want the leader to understand that if you are a Christian, or you're a person of faith, then make sure those values are being lived out, not left at home. And so often in scarcity, when we get into these mindsets, we forget that the God we serve created it all, owns it all, has distributed it all, has planned for it all, and we are but the stewards and the managers. If we would adopt that more, along with 2 Corinthians 7, 8, 9, where Paul talks about God being generous, and generosity is his middle name. It's his first name. He is a grace-filled God. If we would remember that more, we'd be less stressed in our lives. We would also be able to look for those resources, and that's what's key. Those resources are in the community. If you're doing a nonprofit, you probably are not the first person to have the idea. Somebody else has had the idea, but you are providing leadership to it. So,
well, and if they got the same exact idea, you should have checked ahead of time. Yeah. Chances are, I mean, you and I do this pretty much the same kind of footprint, but we probably do it very differently. And if you and I were to work every minute, every day, we still wouldn't scratch the surface of people that need this. So it's interesting that story. I think it was yesterday in the daily lectionary came up. Today was the Lord's Prayer. It was the reading for the day, and the regular, not the Sunday lectionary, but the regular one where you have to go through the Bible. There's two different stories about feeding people with slightly different numbers, but the same concept. Mm-hmm. And I often wondered if it was the same place and different interpretations, probably the different gospel writers. But it's a fundamental. I do think Jesus takes, and it's what we've learned and we apply in Center Vision, we take the values and we take it further with guiding principles. And every time you see Jesus addressing something, it's very principle based. He ain't going to be buffaloed. He's going to be sticking to principles, which is the core of defining our culture. And I think the principle is that God's given us abundance. And so we're being unfaithful by denying that.
That is a very true and accurate statement. We're unfaithful, and I guess the opposite of that, or the other side of that, is that we're doubting. We are unbelieving, right? It's Peter stepping outside of the boat. It's you said two miracles. It's actually in Mark 8 that the next feeding of the 4,000 happens, and there This time the crowd is there for days.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
not just an afternoon. And there, the disciples again are like, we don't need to feed these people. And how's this going to happen? You're just like, man, it takes a long time for people to get this mindset that God's going to provide.
Yeah. Yeah, and you think the guys that hung around would learn, but we all have our challenges about how do we take these lessons that have been taught us, and I do find that there's recurring issues. That's Matthew 13 that you're referring to, isn't it?
Mark 6 and Mark 8. It's
Right,
in
right.
Matthew's gospel. Feeding the 5,000 is the only miracle that's in every gospel. So it's pretty cool. It's
Yeah.
pretty important. So, we ought to listen
It was,
up. So
it was the Matthew iteration. Yes. So it's repeated for a reason. So what you talked about, let's go back before I ask this next question. You talked about cause-based charities. There's cause-based businesses, cause-based churches, cause-based association. Define what you mean by that definition.
by cause base, so when we work with you, we want to really dig in and understand what drives you. So what's the passion on your heart? And a cause would mean this is what's motivating you, what's pushing you out there, that's filling your boat, that's filling your engine, that's waking you up in the morning. So matter of fact, the number one thing we assess for with our leaders is cause driven. uh, some people would say, well, my cause is to make money. Okay, that's fine if that's your bottom line. The people we work with, that's one of their issues, but it's not their primary driving issue. So, we've helped launch things that are get women out of sex trafficking into homes and apartments. And that ministry, that nonprofit was started by a former police officer in Detroit who Debbie worked in the sex crimes division and felt God wanted her to do something about the problem rather than prosecute the people who were the problem. Uh, we've worked with help start mobile medical clinics, mobile food banks, support groups for single Puerto Rican moms, language schools for Hmong immigrant children, homeless shelters, coffee shops that double as churches and community centers. So all of those were started by a person or a husband, wife, or a team, and they were united around this is the cause, this is the problem, this is what we want to fix, this is what we want to solve for. Uh, and it was philanthropic or altruistic. It was social good would be maybe another way that people would say that today. So, my cause is developing people. I want to pour into people for the sake of Jesus. I want to see his kingdom grow. That's what drives me. That's what gets me up in the morning. It's why I lead a network, 6,000 plus people. Why we have a training platform, why we do what we do is because that's what I want to see happen. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, that not just I want to leave behind, but I believe God wants me to leave behind. So.
One of our listeners on here um, teaches um, in junior colleges, and they're not candidates for Ivy League colleges. They're people who live in very common places, so in not very substantial means typically. And so he presented to one of them, write two things. I want you to choose a nonprofit and report about it. And they first said, what is a nonprofit? And then the other project he attempted, this is the very beginning of the term. He said, I want you to write what's going to be on your tombstone, your eulogy. What's going to be your eulogy and what they're going to say about you when you're gone. They didn't know what a eulogy was. And so it's a new experience and getting outside of your comfort zone, discovering something new. But it reminds, so when they started thinking about, well, what are they going to say about my life when I'm no longer here? And part of what you're doing is creating a legacy by empowering other people to be successful. So it's
Right.
the Woolsey legacy by it's by your brand name. So talk about in order for organizations to be successful, and you mentioned, and the title of this is about growth. And so it's not only We want to grow our church to be big. Well, we need a critical mass of people to be able to do something significant. So there's a growth factor that's so essential. So talk about what are the key ingredients for growing any organization, especially a nonprofit or cause-based charity?
Well, we begin with the person who's leading it. It's going to rise and fall to a large degree on that. So you've got this leader, this individual who wants to see change happen. They want to see something happen. They're also going to have a skill set that's going to help with that. Now, again, the smaller the entity, your skill set is probably going to be more generic, more utilitarian. Perhaps they've started things before in the past. Uh, Again, if when we assess you, we can almost tell how scalable you're going to be, because to start something and then scale something, that's a whole nother thing. But you want to get that leader and then the leadership team, very critical. We want them to be self-aware. That's why we do the work we do on the front end of saying, do you understand what's driving you? Do you understand the boundaries that you've set on things? If you really want to know what your values are, just see when you get angry at people, they crossed a value of yours, they broke a value. And let's make sure you understand that, because the more you understand it, you can articulate it, you'll be able to recruit better for it. You'll also understand why people are becoming a part of your nonprofit, good or bad, your organization. So we focus first of all on that leader, building a team around him or her that is complementary, mitigates the leader's weaknesses, that complements the strengths of that individual. We also then want to see, depending on what stage they're at. So if we're talking about a nonprofit that's stuck, let's do that. So they've been around a little bit, they had some success, or maybe they never got off the launch pad really well. After we say, okay, we got the leader, we can pour into that person, we can develop that. The next thing we would do is to really help them hone in on their customer. Right now, working with a nonprofit in one of the communities near where I live outside of Austin. She has had some great success. She's a United Methodist Church pastor. She has a heart for the business community, but also has a heart for the schools. And this particular community is somewhat impoverished. It doesn't have a good commercial income base, so the schools are hurting. And but she was kind of running around circles, and she had this fire, this fire, this fire, this fire. And how do we align that and build some momentum for growth for that? And so we worked about 3 hours, worked on actually probably 6 hours, worked on who's that customer. And that's going to flow out of who do you want to serve? I mean, if we had to lop off everybody else you're serving, but you get to keep one that's really has your heart, that you resonate with, you can talk their language, you've been in their shoes, they look like you, feel like you, it's that kind of thing. She said, I really have a heart for the business leader. I really want to help the business leader and their businesses be successful in the community, but also bring good to the community. So we ended up there understanding and helping her understand that her core customer is this business leader. It's usually a small business, maybe mid-sized business. But then the partner that she needs to be successful in her nonprofit, she needs a great relationship with the principals of the schools, because they're the ones who share with her the needs of the children and the mentoring program. So she's actually going to help the business leader be successful by providing a lunch on a regular basis for her employees, his or her employees, but then also providing them an opportunity to bless the community, build goodwill in the community for the business, but do good in the community in the form of children and families. So we would focus on that customer and what's their business strategy, how are they going to do that? Then we also always look at income stream. And is the income stream, we encourage that it has both an earned income stream and a donative income stream. And the donative, that's pretty straightforward, but it could actually be those businesses. It will be the businesses. They'll help give donations to her nonprofit for her to do her work for them. So in essence, they've kind of hired her, you might say. But then also, are there some earned revenue streams through facility rentals, through, service provision, whatever it may be. And that builds a stronger base. So leader and team, customer, you can't boil the ocean. So laser focus there. What are your strategies? How's your income going to be provided? And then usually with nonprofits, we find most of them are not adept at fundraising, and the leader of the nonprofit could use some strong coaching and training and fundraising. We have a whole module we work with on that. Uh, and then last of all, after that, it would just be your communication channels, your platform. How are you getting your story out effectively, redundantly, repeatedly? Uh, that would be key too.
That's quite a list. And so I think you may be aware that my previous career was a church music director, and there
Wow.
and on the music stand is like the strategic plan. That's the music score.
Mhm.
And we want to just say, okay, y'all come and we're going to make music, and then what you get is this grand cacophony. So instead of a board that's energized, you get a board that looks like this. And so you have people that are turning their back on you, and because they don't get it. And so what I find, and you just highlighted a number of important topics in that description that you gave. So there's basically the bottom line for me is uh, the organization is going to function to the level of the leadership. And if you started it, you might not be the one to lead it. It might be your vision. And many times visionaries are not tactical. And so to realize that, and we prefer to think of skills and gaps in center vision, that I got these really good skills, but these I don't do so well. That's a gap that somebody else has got that as their number one skill. So we bring them in. So I don't think we know how to lead in that manner in nonprofits, because we think if we delegate it, we're irresponsible rather than being a wise leader. You want to talk about, empowering others for a minute?
Right. Again, the past experience is the best predictor of future success. And if you as a nonprofit leader, it's very hard to lead into a place you've never been. Or let me just say it's more difficult. If you've been there before, maybe you were on a boat and you were on the boat that scaled something. You weren't in charge of the boat, you were a helping hand, but at least you've been on the journey before. So for instance, in my own ministry, I started out by the grace of God. I was always in large churches. So my first call, it was a relatively large church, 650 in worship, West County, St. Louis. I was youth and evangelism, but the congregation, while I was there, I was, the outreach guy and small groups, and that ministry grew to about 800 in a couple of years. So it was an anomaly around there. Then the next ministry I was evangelism, adult ed, discipleship, small groups, and executive pastor, and that was 7 years. But they asked me to start a contemporary worship service, and I was the guy who organized all of that. Well, I can't sing a lick, So you've got, when you're put into those situations and you realize this is what we're trying to do, I'm going to have to build a team. I'm going to have to get people around me, or else it's just not going to happen. And I was always in team settings, and that ministry grew from 650 to 1100. And then my family, we were called to start a church in West Houston. Now, the dad who raised me was Hispanic. He was my stepdad, but he raised me. And I always thought I'd go be a missionary in Mexico. I love the culture, from Texas. But the only model I'd ever heard of was they kind of parachute you in. You're like by yourself and you got to pull this thing off. And man, I had never been by myself. So when we went to start this church, I convinced the leaders to let us bring a whole staff in from the beginning. So we approached it like a business, got a line of credit, got people to back us, and we were off to the races. 40 acres of land, 7 families to 1,600 families, 3 locations. But we only could do it because we had 1 or 2 paid staff. There were 2 with me, and then your question there on how do you delegate and mobilize. We had a lovely phrase that we called key volunteers. They were unpaid staff. So we elevated them as staff. They had responsibility, they had authority, but they didn't need to be paid. They had life situations that wasn't a necessity for them, but they did have time on their hands and they wanted to use it well. So if you're going to raise up people, you as the leader have to be clear. You have to be clear on where you're going. That's the vision thing. It's like think of it a destination. Vision answers the where question. And before you'd get on the plane with me, you'd want to be convinced of two things. One, do I know where we're going? And two, can I get us there? Can I fly us there? Else you won't get on the plane. So you've got to be clear for your staff or your volunteers what it is we're trying to do. And then, and this is a little adage I heard decades ago, but I still use it. Everyone wants to make a significant contribution to a successful cause. So, how can I help them see the significant contribution they're making to this successful cause? Why do I need them? Why do I even want them on the bus in the first place? What are they bringing to the show? And then, am I going to be a strong enough leader to make sure the boundaries are clear, but they're wide? So we can play in this field over here. But then am I going to be a strong enough leader to let them go play and to resource them, not direct them? And that's a key mindset.
Way wise words. We're going to pay some bills here for a minute. We'll come back and unpack the leadership skills of Jesus as per delegation. Center Vision publishes a magazine, Nonprofit Performance 360. It's leadership stories, lessons, articles about how you can continue to raise the bar on your leadership. If you are running a cause-based business and you're philanthropy minded, you might want to use some of your marketing money to reach nonprofit leaders if you offer a service that might help them be more effective. So we have a unique marketing package. It's the magazine's mailed like this with your logo on the front, your offer. You can give them the magazine and make an offer, but it's very targeted, and the ROI, which means return on your investment in this case, is extremely high. Our open rate is almost 100% for those packages that come in the mail, because we clearly identify. So if you want to use your marketing money for philanthropy and be good at marketing at the same time and get an extremely high ROI, Hugh at centervisionleadership.org. Email me. It's on the page for this interview at thenonprofitexchange.org. So Bill, these are really, really important topics that you're bringing up. And the illustration that you started with was the Jesus feeding the multitude. So he had his group, and he just said, "Follow me," and they did. So follow me, and to me, that's an invitation. And what he did is delegate, group them into 50, have them sit down, find some food, and then they brought it to him. So basically, he was very clear. And so I find that deficit a lot. There's two big barriers I'd like you to speak to. One is lack of clarity. We got this vision for what we're doing, and it takes us 30 minutes to tell somebody. We should do it in 30 seconds. And then secondly, the biggest issue I see over and over and contributes to the massive burnout rate is over-functioning. And so we don't delegate because we ought to be willing to do what we ask other people to do, which is an excuse, not a reason. So over-functioning, we're robbing people of an opportunity to what you just talked about. So speak to over-functioning and how that model of Jesus, delegating. Speak to those two, please.
Yeah. Your first one there where you said vision and clarity, I want to kind of double click a little bit on that. And that we want to see, we have a pitch process. It's a 15-second message map. So in 15 seconds, you should be able to tell me what it is your org does and 3 unique characteristics that set it apart from the others. The one sentence statement, we want to see in 144 characters, not 144 words, 144 characters. And so, it's hard. It's easy to say a bunch of words. It's hard to say a few words that are all you need to say. So that vision clarity is very important. And matter of fact, when it's not, everything becomes fuzzy. Your staff aren't sure. They're not sure what you want to do. Your donors aren't sure what you do. Why should I give you $100,000 to invest? So that's very, very important. I would just say your delegation aspect and then Jesus's whole miracle there. First of all, in the delegation, use the word, I'm trying to think what word you use, but I would also use this word trust. You said over function. And yes, your typical founder type A personality. But I also think oftentimes, if they founded something and it's got some legs and street cred, they're probably pretty, above average performer, right? I mean, there are probably a number of things they can do pretty well, or else they wouldn't be in that role. They didn't pull it off. It, they're going to have to come to grips with people that they may have to delegate to, that they're going to have to help them get to that level. And a buddy of mine who used to run a number of huge companies, and he told me early on, he probably told me this 20 years ago because he was on my board and his family were there when we first launched and the church in West Houston. And he said, Bill, you're such a high demand and you want A players. And he said, but the reality is you're not always going to have A players, and you're going to have some B's and some C's, and you're going to have to really come to grips with how you develop the C into a B and the B into an A. But to just say, if you're not an A, you can't play on my team. He said, my sense is you're going to live a life of frustration. And so that was a great mindset, because it's like in being a pastor, I got the Ephesians 4, equipping the saints for the doing good works, doing the ministry, but on the staff, I kind of forgot that at times. And so, how do we develop the people around us, but look internally, and why is it I'm not trusting them? Why is it that I'm not willing to hand this over to them? And maybe there is a good reason. Maybe there's something subconsciously that I frankly don't think they're competent enough, and I need to address that. Either that's my bad or they aren't, and we need to have that conversation. But I often find it's an expectations issue that's not necessarily needed. And believe me, I'm not a guy who likes to do half-ass work, but at the same time, how can we do it well, and how can we help people succeed in the seat we have them in? So I would encourage you as a leader to look at a trust issue, a respect issue. If you've never run your staff through any kind of assessment, Hugh, I don't know what you use. We use a Harrison assessment, job success analysis assessment, and it's based on enjoyment theory. That if you enjoy doing something, you're probably pretty good at it. People tell you you're good at it, you get better at it, and it just feeds on itself in a wonderful way. So as much as possible, I always try to get people into spots they enjoy and they're good at. And as opposed to, you can't always do that. And there are times somebody has to sweep the floor, whether you like it or not. But as much as possible, if I can do that with the key volunteers I have and the key staff that I have, it mitigates the management struggles.
Yeah. So I worked my way up from 120 member church to 12,000 and had, more times you hit the wall, the more you learn you've got to delegate. And so having 750 people managed in 22 ensembles and committees and such, you got to learn pretty fast. You got to get things off your plate, but you also have to be very clear. And so in the last church I served, you'll love this. We eliminated the word volunteer. Just totally. So we went from a small group of people volunteering and doing a half-assed, as you say, job, to saying, okay, no more volunteers. You're going to be members in ministry. You're servant leaders. So pretty much everybody in the church stepped up to a job because we stopped doing and we empowered people. So what you just talked about, I'm hearing as our number one job is to be clear on a vision. Number two is to empower others to utilize their skill. And even the person sweeping the floor and making coffee can perceive themselves as a leader because they're making something happen.
Yeah. And again, the people with spiritual gifts of helps, they get great fulfillment out of using those gifts in a variety of ways. So as the leader of the org and the people around me that I'm responsible for developing and equipping, clarity, again, my clarity and simple, clear, concise, compelling, kind of those 3 C's for them. But then what is it that I need from them? What contribution am I looking for? So I'm clear, not just on where we're going and what we're trying to do, but clear on what the expectations are for them. So it's one thing to delegate and then abdicate. That's not what we're saying. You delegate and stay in touch and make sure they're clear on what you're expecting and what the organization needs. So again, just your swing thought is, how can I help them be successful? And you're trying to help them be successful, because then everybody is successful and everybody wins. Uh, I think also my son he's a consultant with Bain Consulting, which is a very high stressful consulting group. And I asked him, I said, so tell me what your schedule looks like. This was a couple of years ago. He now leads a team, but when he was on the team, first of all, companies that hire them, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for a week of work. And they're trying to value companies to buy and sell and all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, in the morning we meet as a team. The manager goes around and says, okay, what are you doing? Next few hours, what are you doing? What are you doing? He said, every couple hours they check in. How's it going? Do you need something else? Can I get you something else? Da, 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 da. End of the day. Okay. Did you get this done? How'd this go? So what I learned there was they've got high performing people. I mean, these are very high performing people. You don't get in there if you're not. But they also have a very rigorous communication of manager to team.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't just let them go do, because they know at the pace they're running, they're going to hit walls, and they want to help them not get frustrated, and they want to help them figure out we can get through that wall. And that was a huge insight for me that, I think a lot of the nonprofit leaders we've worked with in the past, they tend to think, well, if I tell you kind of what I need done, you'll go figure it out and you can go work on your own. Instead of, we probably ought to talk about this and make sure you've got what you need, and which is a change in the leader. The leader has to change, and that's a huge issue.
In the writing of Murray Bowen, psychiatrist with Bowen Leadership Principles, he talks about you can't change other people. One of the principles is you change yourself and people respond to you.
That's right. Family Systems 101.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And so we're going to do it for them. We're robbing them of opportunity. Plus, we're really irritating them many times. I was trying to think of a nice way of saying that. So that was a lot of it. Your big sound bites there will be in the transcript. We're at the Nonprofit Exchange interviewing Bill Woolsey. His website is FiveTwo, FiveTwo.com. And he obviously is a person of great wisdom and experience and passion for changing people's lives by equipping leaders. So there's a lot of times people say, I got it. Well, the thing that stood out to me that I want to go back to, I mean, everything you've said is brilliant, but one thing stood out to me that's lacking in delegation is performance expectations. And you said expectations. So we're setting up conflict right there by not clearly saying this is what it looks like, is what I expect, right?
Right. So one of the reasons I love the assessment tool that we used, and I've used it with staff, and we use it with all of our teams we work with and all our employees, and I used it for a decade. But it uses what is called paradox theory. Okay, in paradox theory, it takes traits that appear to be against each other, and antithesis, and they put them next to each other and say, you know what, you can actually be both of these traits at the same time and be effective. And one of the ones, and this is for those of you who are leading orgs and you have staff or key volunteers underneath you and you want to delegate things to them, one of the ones you should pay attention to in your own psyche is this assertive trait. And assertive means I will clearly say to you what I need. And oftentimes, and especially in nonprofit leaders who are more quote unquote pastoral, they're compassionate, they're loving and serving. Because what it does on this particular graph, it says assertive on the the x-axis. I guess I always forget x-axis, and then on the horizontal axis is helping. And oftentimes, if you're high in helping, but you're low and assertive. What happens is there comes a point you get upset at the person because they're not doing what you want them to do. But your problem is you never clearly told them what you wanted them to do. And so if you will learn how to grow in being assertive, doesn't be mean, it just means clearly, it goes back to that clarity thing you said earlier, clearly saying, I need this by tomorrow at noon. And if we don't get it tomorrow at noon, we're going to miss this whole deadline. So tomorrow at noon, when he comes into you and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had to do this other appointment. I just wasn't able to get that done." Now all of a sudden you've clearly said the expectations, and you can say, "I already shared with you what was going to happen, and now I'm very frustrated." As opposed to, "I wanted it tomorrow at noon, but I never told you. I kind of hoped you'd do some osmosis ESP thing and get it from me." And so all of a sudden it lets the emotions be out there in a valid way. And it won't, it'll mitigate some of the conflict that all of a sudden, you don't just all of a sudden become a bear and they can't figure out why the heck you became SOB, the whole thing. So
That's right. So the things you're describing, I would say, fit into, we've embraced transformational leadership as, the empowering leader. It's about the vision, and it's about building leaders on teams fundamentally. So let me give you a couple of quotes. Are you okay to hear from a couple of people, questions?
Oh, please.
So on the way there, there's a quote from a couple of people I'd like you to respond to. This Jewish guy named Paul says, be transformed in RSV. I like this version, be transformed by the renewing instead of renewal. It's ongoing. And then James Allen, his little book, As a Man Thinketh, people want to change their circumstances, but are unwilling to change themselves. They therefore remain bound.
Yep.
So there's a lot on the leader to say, yes, I'm going to embrace something different.
So oftentimes you don't, the entrepreneur, the founder who scales is the exception. And the reason they're the exception, there's a wonderful book called Leadership Pipeline. It's by Ram Charan, Charan. And he has in there the understanding of the leadership ladder. And as an organization grows, or as you want to grow in an organization, every time you go up a rung, you have to change two things. You have to change what you value, which necessitates you change what you do with your time. So if you don't change what you do with your time, you really haven't changed your value. And it's very hard to change values. And this is why in the beginning of when you first start in an organization, you bring value by doing. But then when you get promoted, you manage doers, and now you bring value by helping doers do successfully well. And so you're now bringing value not by doing, but by helping others do. That's the hardest switch anybody can make. So we'll often see founders who hit founder's trap because they aren't willing to change what they do with their time and making sure everybody else is doing well. And they get stuck in that, you said it earlier, over-functioning. They're still trying to bring value by doing instead of by equipping others to do, and their org doesn't grow and it falls back and yada, yada. So.
Yay. That's a differentiation of self with Bowen systems. So speaking of books, and you mentioned the word philanthropy earlier, we have Bob Hopkins, who's written this masterful book that everybody should have on their coffee table, because they're either running an organization or they're philanthropists, and he certainly understands philanthropy. Bob, I bet you're hearing some good stuff. You have a comment or a question for Bill?
Yeah, this is good conversation. I just left that classroom that you were talking about where we did our eulogies as the last assignment of my coursework, which is called Human Communications. But anyway, and it's amazing, the students were embarrassed to think out of the box. And not only were they were embarrassed to tell anybody that they wanted to live a life that had adventure in it. And that was something really crazy. Like one boy, he said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I've decided that I want to be Batman. And I'm going to be Batman and I'm going to die. And this is how I'm going to die. This is what I want as my eulogy. Of course, it was the only eulogy that was interesting because everybody else was going to have 3 kids and going to have a house and going to live in Montana and things like that. And when I was listening to you talk about structure and nonprofit organizations, it seems to me like we try to box people in to follow the rules and regulations without giving lots of freedom and encouragement to critically think about things that might be different. And what do you think about that topic?
Well, I think first of all, the box people in, the reality is we do have laws, we do have regulations, we do have rules. Any organization, any family has rules to help it function well. I think the key thing that you stress, Bob, kind of what I said earlier, when I'm clear on where we're trying to go, we call it the commander's intent. Okay, so what do you intend to try to see happen here? And what's your overall goal, so that everybody else knows what the goal is, but then they can accomplish it in the ways they feel best are going to work in their situation or their neck of the woods. So I think what's critical is, first of all, to make sure there are boundaries. There are always boundaries. What are they? As broad as possible. We're all going in this direction. Here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take that hill. We're trying to take that hill by tomorrow. And then what is it you're going to be doing that contributes to that movement, that overall direction? And yes, I'm a biggie in, and probably because I'm this way, I don't want to be micromanaged. There are times, though, that I've encountered people who say, well, you're micromanaging me. And when I'm working with somebody, it's like, no, you just don't want to be managed. And there's a difference between being managed well and being micromanaged. But at the same time saying, how's it going? How are we doing on that project? So I'm big on what we're trying to get done. I'm going to give you the freedom, but if also understanding in leadership, if I give you the freedom, I'm also holding you accountable to the outcome. And so you can have the freedom to do whatever you want toward that outcome, but then you also have to be willing to own the outcome. And that's usually where people, oftentimes they'll want freedom, but they don't want to be held responsible for what happens, even though, we may have history that says, hey, we know if you do it this way, we can have some success. We've already tried all that. So it's an art, leadership. There's a little book called The Art of Leadership, and it is very much an art. But I'm with you. Let them play, but there are some boundaries, and here's what we're trying to get done.
Yay. Bob always has good insights. So Bill, have you ever wanted to be Batman?
No. You know what? I try to think, when you said that, I was just talking to my son the other day, and we built a home out in the hill country because my in-laws live half a mile from us, and my wife is oldest, and my in-laws are 82. But I said to my youngest son the other day, I said, I haven't told your mother this, but there are times that I would love to just get like an RV and pull it behind, and let's just go live, in RV parks around the country and visit people. But I don't think your mom's going to go for that at this stage of our lives. So,
so
that'd be my Batman.
That would be your good eulogy. So, Jeffrey, you're unmute your mic and you want to weigh in. We have 2 people here that are both CFRE professional funding executives who are both retired and supporting supervision. So Jeff, come on in.
Oh, I'll just say how great it is to see someone supporting the community like this, Bill. It's just tremendous to be able to have some resources. And one of the things that Hugh talks about all the time is it's just so important, and you talked about it too, which is that we've got a lot of nonprofits out there that think that they're sort of in a vacuum from the business community, and that they can do all of these other things and not pay attention to the business side because they're a nonprofit, quote unquote nonprofit.
Right,
I'm not a real big fan of the word the word nonprofit.
Right.
I tend to use the word charity, just because I think people see nonprofit and they think, oh yeah. Well, if you end every year with $0, you're going to start every next year with $0, and you're not going to get very far.
That is, yeah, there's something magical about December 31. No, there's not. The
Right.
January
Yeah.
1 happens tomorrow, and it's the same bank account. So,
Right, exactly. So yeah, on the 31st of December, let's try and have as much money as we can. So when the person comes to us on January 1st and says, I need help, we don't have to say,
yes.
well, give us a few months and we'll see what we can do for you. But yeah, just getting these folks to understand how important good business principles are, just, and I think a lot of it's because folks come into this very altruistic and with really great intentions and huge hearts, but nobody standing next to them or behind them saying, hey, this is all great, but let's take a step backwards and let's focus on the things that are going to make you successful long term. And that's what you're doing, which is really cool.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Yeah, our start new training, and Hugh, you mentioned FiveTwo.com, and which is kind of our portal site, and you can get to our training site, which is startnewtraining.com. You can get to it through FiveTwo, but our whole focus, whether you're brand new and haven't started, you just got an idea and you want to turn it into a launch, or you already have something and you're not getting traction. Our three pillars are build, fund, and launch. And each of those has some key things you need to pay attention to as you're going about it. And in this community work you're doing, we say money is not the mission, but where there's no money, there's no mission. And so how is it that you're going to make sure the dollars you're using are wisely being used, and they're all contributing and pulling in that way? When we work with people, they tend to define their customer or their client, if that may be a better word for them, so broadly that it's hard to see the person. So go back to this clarity thing that you mentioned earlier. We want clarity on who you're serving. We want to know, you can't boil the ocean. So let's laser in on this person you're serving. And the smaller you are, the more critical that is. So you can leverage your resources effectively. You can tell stories. You can find donors who also have that niche. That's who they want to serve. That's what they want to contribute towards. It makes your messaging cleaner. Everything becomes simpler when you are very clear on who God is calling you to serve and help in your community.
That's very, very wise words. And I'd like to reemphasize something that you have said, is that this is generic. If you're leading a business, you're leading a nonprofit, you're leading a church, you're leading a community organization like a membership organization, the fundamental principles are the same. We lead the vision, we lead people. So we're down to the last minute and a half. What thought would you like to leave people, or a challenge, or a quote? What do you want to leave people with today?
Probably off of what Jeff said in his last words, is that so many nonprofit leaders don't have someone to walk with them or encourage them. Our network, we encourage. That's our fundamental value, is we encourage people. And if you break down the word encourage, you pour courage in. And so I would just say to you, if you're lacking courage, if you're lacking wisdom, find somebody who will walk alongside of you, whether it be a coach or an organization or a network, that's going to help. And in the biblical picture of hold up your arms as you're trying to lead the charge out. So that would just be my word to you. You're doing great work. You're doing important work in your communities. And we, for sure, at FiveTwo, Start New Training, we want to help you be successful and effective, because ultimately, without you, there's going to be a need that goes missing there in that city.
Bill Woolsey, thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience today, which is extensive. And to find out more about Bill and his work, it's FiveTwo, FiveTwo.com. And there you'll find everything he talked about and his learning. So, Bill, thank you for sharing with us on the Nonprofit Exchange.
Hugh, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.